The question I want to answer today is, does God care? Very general, very open-ended. I actually say that. Could you pull down those first four sliders just a little bit? I asked that question, and you probably have something that popped. You probably fill in the blank. Does God care about me? Does God care about my finances? Does God care about my dog? Does God care about fill in the blank? But the general question I want to ask today is, does God care? Very open-ended question. In our day, in our age, we tend to equate care with what people give us, be it their time, maybe a gift. Did they remember you on your birthday? Did they show up to your soccer games? We equate care with how much people give us. And I want to start this morning with answering the question, does God care? A resounding yes, He does. But I want to get to that answer by starting at a different place than what you may expect. I do not want to answer this question, does God care, by looking at our circumstances. I don't ever want to answer that question by looking at the circumstances in my life. Because the reality is, God cares even through our circumstances. His love is made known. The reality is this, your health could be up, top notch. And you say, God, thank you for my health. Where your neighbor's health could, maybe for his entire life, has been struggling and suffering. And he's possibly found God through his struggles and can rejoice in his pains and suffering. Or you'd be like, well, God doesn't care about me. Look at my health. Your finances. We can't dictate this answer, does God care, based upon our finances, because you may require $80,000 to live off of and your neighbor $20,000. We can't throw a dollar amount. One 3-letter word that tells me and tells us we cannot answer this question based upon our circumstances is Job. Right? You, as the reader of Job, you know what's going on. Right? You see behind the scenes a God who, he has a dad crush on Job. He's like, hey, have you considered my boy, Job? Right? Satan's like, hey, Satan comes to God and is like, yeah, what's going on, God? I'm kind of roaming the earth. And God's like, have you considered my boy, Job? It's like, yeah, but you've crafted like a hedge of protection around him. Like, remove that and he'll run from you. It's like, go for it. But don't take his life. Right? A little bit of element of care there. And we get to see Job struggle like something we would never want to go through. But we know behind the scenes God cares. And Job is hanging on throughout the story, turning to God, but trying to find the care of God. In Job chapter 10, Nancy, you don't have this. I read this passage this week. And Job comes before Psalms. Job says this about God's care. Verse 12 says, you have granted me life and steadfast love. And Job, in the midst of his worst situation, turns to God, you granted me life, steadfast love, and your care has preserved my spirit. I mean, Job finds a moment of worship in the fact that he's still alive. Yet these things you hid in your heart. I know that this was your purpose. I mean, Job can see the purpose of God even in his circumstances. But to answer, does God care, based upon our circumstances, can tempt us to waver in our faith. What we need to do is look at the nature of God and look at who we are. And so today we're going to look at God's nature. We're going to look at who is Jesus, who is God, and we're going to take a brief moment and look at ourselves. We're going to go to John, and John chapter 1, verses 1 through 13. Let me give you a summary of what John has done up to this point. John has pointed to Jesus Christ as being the Word. He said, in the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. What is he doing? John is pointing out the divinity of Jesus. He's saying Jesus is God, and we finally get to Jesus' name in verse 14. But John is making a point not to use Jesus' name, and I think for a specific reason. But he's showing us that Jesus Christ is God. All right, that he was there in the beginning. He was with God, and he was God. Oh, not only that, he made the world. And not only that, he gave everyone life, and he enlightens everyone. He puts the knowledge of God onto everybody's heart. And not only that, he came into the world. Not only that, he came to his own. Oh, and by the way, darkness will not defeat him. You see what John's doing? A part of me wonders, John, are you not labeling Jesus as Jesus yet? Because you know, as humanly speaking, the moment we slap a name on something, we feel like we understand it. I mean, we see this in Adam in the garden. He names the animals based upon who they are, the nature of the animal. When we named our daughter Anna, Grace, Anna means grace, and we named her because to us in that moment of life, it was a double measure of God's grace on us. And we say, Anna, we know our daughter, and we know her by her name. Who named Jesus Jesus? God the Father did. You see, I think what John is doing here is he's showing us that Jesus is not just God. He's a big God. Capital G, capital O, capital D. The temptation is when you label something a name, you begin to believe you understand. And we understand to some extent Jesus as he's revealed. But the moment we say Jesus, our minds want to go to his human figure. Humanly speaking, we know Jesus. You know, it's maybe for you, it's Jesus was man first, then God. Absolutely the opposite. Jesus was always God who came out of the steadfast love of his heart to fulfill his Father's will as a human. He clothed himself in flesh. The question you got to keep in the back of your mind, and you're going to wonder at times, why are we talking about this? Is does God care? We got to answer the nature of God. What is God's nature? And we're going to close with a very, hopefully soul-blowing, awe-struck passage that is just, like, to me, has rocked my soul this week. But to get there, we look at Jesus, and John shows us Jesus is a big God. And Midtowners, I want Jesus to be a big God to you. I don't want him to be your buddy or your friend or someone you know. Someone you know, he died and rose again. He's sitting at the right hand. He is God, all-encompassed God who came in man form. Like, that should blow our minds. God passed through heavens, came down to earth, and he dwelled with those whom he created. Incredible. Incredible. And we get to learn more about Jesus here in a minute. So John starts there. He starts his book of persuasion to move you to belief in Jesus by stating that Jesus is God, and not just God, a big God. Sovereign, all in control, made everything you see. He gave you life. And by the way, he will defeat all evil. Doesn't stand a chance. That's who you have a relationship with. That's who I want you to place your faith in. Jesus, not just man, but Jesus as God who came in man form. And we pick up in verse 14 of John. And John now moves more into Jesus' humanly figure. He says in John 1 verse 14, and the Word became flesh. The Word, if you go back to verse 1, in the beginning was the Word. The Word became flesh. The Word was with God. The Word became flesh. And the Word was God. God became flesh. And dwelt among us. This word dwelt, the fancy word for it is tabernacled. The tabernacle in the Old Testament times, if you're not familiar with it, was the tent of meeting. It was the tent in the middle of the Israeli camp where God's presence resided. This word dwelt literally means Jesus, God, made his home here. God came and lived among us. He tabernacled among us. He made his home here. And we have seen his glory, glory as of the only Son from the Father. John says, we've we give witness to the fact that Jesus is God. We've seen his glory. We've seen God in flesh form. How amazing would that be? To see Jesus Christ walking the earth. And to know in your hearts and your mind that that's God. God is here. He was full of grace and truth. If you're taking notes, you're underlining, I want you to underline, circle, or write down this word grace. It pops up 4 times in this passage. And as John reveals the fleshly side of Jesus, he begins to cloak him in this term grace, and we see this word truth twice. We saw the word truth 2 weeks ago. We talked about it. It means, it's from the Hebrew word hamed, which means steadfast. Job talked about the steadfast love of God. It means faithful. It means consistent. That Jesus was faithful, he was steadfast, he was consistent, and he was full of grace. John, talk about John the Baptist, bore witness about him and cried out, "This was he of whom I said." There he is, guys. That's the one I've been talking about. "He who comes after me ranks before me, because he was before me. And from his fullness, we have all received grace upon grace." I mean, well, does God care? I mean, just that answers the question. We have all received grace upon grace. John, when he uses this word, I mean, he's generally speaking of the world, mankind. All have received grace. Just the fact you're alive, you've got life, you've been enlightened, is grace upon grace. For the law was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God, the only God who is at the Father's side. He has made him known. John, all of a sudden, it doesn't really fit. He brings up Moses. We're reading, and all of a sudden Moses is dropped into the equation, and the law is dropped into the equation. It really doesn't fit the passage. I want to, John, what are you talking about? What importance does Moses have? Why do we need to know Moses brought the law, but Jesus brought grace? Why bring this into the equation of the grace and truth of Jesus Christ? Moses, especially in the Old Testament time, was the one who paved, well, at least in the Pharisees' eyes, would pave the path to God by giving the law. Here's the law, and here's what you must do to be saved. To be received by God, you must uphold the law. So Moses was seen as this intermediary, this guy who stood between us and God. By giving the law, he showed us the way to God. The prophet of all prophets. Moses was honored, it was upheld, the law was worshipped. And we've got Jesus, who came in grace and truth. Almost seems like it stands in contradiction to one another. Was Moses and the law, was that a swing and a miss? I mean, what does the law and Moses have to do with Jesus? What does the law have to do with us? I preach, believe, have faith every week. We don't talk about the law that much. I mean, what does the law have to do with you today, right now? We can't cover all that in today's sermon, but I mean, just let's touch on it. Romans 3, verse 31. Actually, I'm going to start back at verse 27. Then what becomes of our boasting? Paul's talking in his letter to the Romans. It is excluded. By what kind of law? By a law of works? No, but by the law of faith. I mean, you can't boast in your law of works. Why? For we hold that one is justified, made innocent in God's eyes. God looks at you and says, you're good. You're innocent. I don't hold you guilty by faith apart from works of the law. God says you're innocent not by what you do, but because of your faith. Or is God the God of Jews only? Because here's where Moses is brought into the equation. Moses gave the law to the Jews. It was not given to the Gentiles. And what Paul's saying is, if you want to say the law is the way unto salvation, what you're saying is all the Gentiles have no hope. That salvation is for the Jews and Jews alone. Is he not the God of Gentiles also? Those who did not get the law, who did not receive the law? Yes, of Gentiles also, since God is one, who will justify the circumcised by faith and the uncircumcised through faith. Paul says, hey, everyone's justified, made innocent, made right in God's sight by faith. So what then about the law? Why the law? Do we overthrow the law by this faith? Do we overthrow it? Do we say, we don't need it? Paul says that by no means. He said that's absurd. On the contrary, we uphold the law. We uphold the law. On the contrary, I mean, it's like, to Paul, it's not even like a topic to discuss. The law is written on our hearts. As we are more conformed into the image of Jesus Christ, the law, through our faith in our conformity into Jesus, becomes a natural result of who we are. And just as I was going through this morning over and over and over again, it's like, okay, God, when you wrote the law and you gave it to Moses, what were you thinking? All right, a little pastoral speculation. I don't think God was sitting up there behind his oval desk or whatever desk, and it's like, all right, what do we need to make these people do in order for them to be good with us? All right, let's give them 10 solid core commandments. And then we'll give them about 327 other commandments that if they do, we're good. I mean, what makes them God's law? I think what God was doing is he was putting his nature, his heart on paper. Israel, you want to be good? Well, then be like me. And he spells out his heart on paper. And this is where Paul says, I don't even really need to talk about this. We uphold the law because we are conformed into the image of Jesus. He later says in Romans 10, and the law becomes a part of who we are. But we got to be careful. Let's go to Romans 7. Romans 7, verse 7. What then shall we say? I mean, what's the purpose of the law? And here I'm saying the law reveals to us the nature of Jesus. The very core of the law, love God, love others. The very essence of what the law is about is for us to become less selfish and more selfless, to focus our gaze and our worship on God, and to direct our love to other people. What then shall we say? That the law is sin? Well, by no means. Paul says, once again, no. This is the law. There's nothing wrong and sinful in the law. Yet if it had not been for the law, I would not have known sin. For I would not have known what it is to covet if the law had not said, you shall not covet. So Paul gives us a reason for the law. It shows us that we need a Savior. Think about it like this. Again, your neighbor has a Corvette, a Lamborghini, whatever you want, some car you want in their driveway. And you say, in your heart, I want their car. I want that. Now, if God did not say, do not covet, would we assume that that's wrong? I mean, to me, that doesn't harm anybody wanting somebody else's stuff. I don't naturally in myself see, like, where's the wrong in that? There's no harm, there's no hurt. It's just between me and myself and I. God says, do not covet. Don't covet your neighbor's stuff. And so it's a law. There's something about God that doesn't want his children to covet. But Paul says, I know because now God has revealed part of who he is to me through the law, that I stand guilty. That I stand as a sinner. That I need help. That I fall short. So real quick, we're going to move a little bit from the nature of God to who we are. And we looked at this past couple weeks, so I don't want to hound on this too much. Paul says, for we are all sinners. All fall short of the glory of God. He later says that no one does good. No, not even one. Actually, David says that. We're inventors of evil. No one seeks after God. There is a very grim picture of humanity in Scripture. Why go there? Why talk about this when we're asking, does God care? We understand where we start in life and who we are before faith, before we meet Jesus. And we understand the worlds apart between us and God. We begin to understand how much God cares. But you got to hold on here, okay? So Paul, because the message it'll be over when it's over, and at the end, I believe it will tie it all together. Does God care? Paul brings in the law. John brings in the law to show us that Jesus is about grace and that the way unto the Father is through Jesus Christ, grace and truth, that the law has another purpose. And we see that in Paul, that's to reveal that, hey, we need grace. We need something other than trying to do the law. We just can't do that. And so, does God care? Does he care? Does he care about you? Does he care about what you're going through? There's a group that believes that God created the world and stepped back. It's done. I created it. Let's just see what happens. Let's see what happens. Is that the God we worship? Well, John shows us very clearly that God himself put on flesh and bone to come be with you so that you can have a relationship with God the Father. I mean, does God care? To me, that's a very clear, resounding yes. But let's go a couple steps further to reveal how much he really cares. Let's go to Philippians 4. I told you at the beginning, I don't want to answer this question based upon our circumstances. Does God care based upon our circumstances? But because we do is we take from God a huge element of God's care that he wants to give to us. If you go to verse 4 through verse 7. Rejoice in the Lord always. Rejoice in the Lord always. I mean, all the time. Always. Always. Like somehow you can rejoice when you're not sleeping at night. There's a way to rejoice when your knee hurts. There's a way to rejoice if the Lord takes a loved one from you. How? I mean, in those moments of life when it seems like God has abandoned you, and what if or maybe you've experienced it, a son or daughter taken from you. Maybe at a young age. It's hard to find the yes to that answer, does God care? Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say rejoice. It says, let your reasonableness be known to everyone. Why? The Lord is at hand. The Lord is as close to you as your hand is close to you. The Lord's right there. The Lord is at hand. You see, I don't want to answer the question, does God care based upon my circumstances? Because God cares about my circumstances. That in my hurts and pains and struggles in life, God's care can be magnified. Let your reasonableness be known to everyone. The Lord is at hand. Do not be anxious about anything. That's kind of hard for you. Don't be anxious. Don't be anxious. What's the cure to anxiety? Well, prayer. Trust that the Lord is at hand. But in everything, in prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your request be known to God. He wants to hear it. He wants to hear what is going on in your life because he cares. Let your request be known to God. And then he leads on with a promise. The peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Every once in a while, I'll talk to somebody who has lost a child. To me, probably the most heart-wrenching thing that I could ever imagine going through. And every once in a while, I talk to someone who knows the Lord, and really this verse is just embedded in their hearts, and the promise of God is, and when they talk about their child through the weeping and the mourning, there's a sense of peace. There's a sense that their heart is being guarded. My only guess is that they're bringing it to the Lord. God, this is hard right now. God, I can't do this right now. God, what is going on? God, it doesn't make sense. God, help. God cares, even about your circumstances. I'm going to go one step further. I ask you this question. Does God care about temptation to sin? Does God care, and not in like a flippant care, we're talking about a tender, loving, sympathetic care, when you are tempted to sin? Just think about it for a minute. Does God care? What's the picture in your mind? The face that God has. There you are in the dark room, all by yourself. Put whatever it is, a liquor bottle, pornography, your temptation to yell at your spouse, to beat a kid, whatever it may be. Maybe it's something subtle, your insecurities, and it's there in front of you. Does God care? What is His response to you? Man, it's hard for me. Just let me speak personally for a moment. It's hard for me at times. When I struggle with temptation to just like, God, there's no way you can love me. There's just no way you could call me your child. That's impossible. I mean, through your law, I know my sin. I'm very aware of it when I do something wrong. And that awareness really just lays the guilt on me, and I just doubt, and my faith is rocked. Does God care? Hebrews 4. (14 through 16). This is one of those passages you have to interpret right. You have to. So I'm glad you're here this morning, because I've put work into understanding what these words mean. Because if you misinterpret it, you miss a man. I don't even know how to label it. Just an essential doctrine to the steadfast love of God. So we're going to read through this, and you really cannot draw assumptions until you get the whole passage. But we're going to stop along the way and define words. This is a passage that I've heard interpreted many ways. But let's just start at verse 14 of Hebrews 4. Since then, we have and I'm not here to I don't think I've got a new interpretation. I'm not here to bring a new interpretation. In fact, if it's new, I've got to be worried about it. For 2,000 years, people have been interpreting the Word of God, and this passage, it's not my goal to bring you something fresh. And hopefully it's not fresh. Hopefully you get this. But if you don't, I honestly pray that chains are falling off your hearts as this is expounded, as you see how much God cares. Let's just start. Since then, we're talking about Jesus. The person that's being talked about is Jesus. Since then, we have a great high priest. All right, what's a high priest? The priest in the Old Testament times was the person who sacrificed, if it was a burnt offering, a sin offering, a guilt offering, a free will offering, who made a sacrifice for you and stood between you and God, made that connection between human and God. That's what a priest. The high priest was the one that would go into the Holy of Holies once a year and make a sacrifice and atonement for all of Israel. The great high priest is Jesus. He's the priest of all priests. He's the one who stands and sacrifices his own self so that you and God can connect. All right, so this is where the author of Hebrews is going. Since then, we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God. Let us hold fast our confession. Hold fast our confession. All right, the assumption here is that you believe in Jesus Christ, you have faith in Jesus, you and Jesus, you have a relationship with him. He says, then let us hold fast our confession, that you are a child of God. Since Jesus Christ is our great high priest, don't let a single iota, an ounce of doubt penetrate your heart that you are a child of God. Don't let it happen. Hold fast to your confession. What's the biggest thing that rocks your confession? Am I a child of God or not? Sin. Can God accept me with me even doing this? What if I fall to this temptation? Am I really a Christian? The author of Hebrews wants you, and God wants you to hold absolutely fast to your confession. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize, circle that word, make note of it, with our weaknesses. This is where things begin to split. How do you define the word weakness? How do you define the word weakness? All right, the first thing that comes to your mind is physically weak. You see, and here's the problem with our Greek words. That when we have them, there is two main definitions for this Greek word weakness. One means physical strength, our physical bodies. The other means our soul. Our soul. And I wrote it down because I did not want to miss this. It's the physical weakness to restrain corrupt desires. It's the weakness to bear trials and temptations. Okay. So this word, how do you interpret it? Is it the physical weakness or is it the weakness of the soul? When you have a spot like this, if you're ever reading Greek, you're just like, what is he saying here? What's the definition? Read it in context. We're already talking about a priest. We're already talking about someone who makes a sacrifice. So to me, this already alludes to the fact that my soul is weak. It's weak. All right, but there's further evidence here. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. So what God is saying to you is that you have a high priest, Jesus Christ, who is able to sympathize with your weakness to temptation, because he's been there. He's been there. Well, hold on a second. I can only recall 3 temptations. Was he tempted to sin, to steal? Was he tempted to have an affair or have sex out of wedlock? I mean, I can only think of 3. Well, it's this word, every respect. At the core of every temptation is saying, God, this is tough right now. I've got a choice between worshiping myself or worshiping you. Those 3 temptations. Let's turn stone into bread, right? Provide for yourself, Jesus. If you worship me, I'll give you all the nations. If you do this, I will give you everything you want. If you throw yourself off a cliff, you will prove to me that you are the Son of God. At the core of all those is Satan attempting to remove Jesus from the relationship he has with his Father. And he doesn't blink. Because his nature is not to sin. Get out of here, Satan. Get out. Me and my Father are one. I would not ever even begin to jeopardize that relationship. But it was still a temptation. To some extent, Jesus' soul was tempted to sin. But he never blinked. He never fell. Because at the core of Jesus' nature is righteousness, is purity, is perfection, is the law spelled out. He upholds it perfect. He cannot break it. It's who he is. Jesus is love. God is love. And steadfast love, faithful, consistent love. Okay, so here we are. We're talking about our temptation to sin. And the word that is used is he sympathizes with your temptation. You ever thought of that before? That God says, I know what it's like. When we went through this building remodeling here, it really took a toll on me. It's just long hours. And it was one of those things that just had to be done. But as a pastor, it took its toll. It took its toll on my family. It took its toll on the church because it removed me. We got, getting through and whatnot and recuperate. I got a pastor friend who's going through the exact same thing, remodeling his church, and he's at the core of it. And as we talk, each time we talk, I see the exhaustion setting in. The words of my family starting to struggle setting in, is coming more rampant. And I'm thinking, I know what you're going through. I've been there. I've been there. God, Jesus, has been in the midst of the temptations that you have. And he says, I understand. The word sympathize is a word full of care. He sympathizes even those moments that you want to turn your back. You see, what we think is Romans 5, when I was an enemy of God, I was reconciled to Christ. But we forget all those moments after that where we are tempted to sin and God is still reconciling us to himself. He's still calling us his sons and daughters. How incredible God's care is for us. But then it doesn't stop, guys. This is absolutely amazing. Let us then, with confidence, not moping, not wondering, not with doubt, but with confidence, with boldness, draw near to what? Where God is, the throne of grace. In the moment of your temptation, the moment of the midst of do I give myself over to myself or to God? Run to God. Why? That we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need. Because your Father wants to help you through it. He wants to give you those two tools and what you need to get through that moment. Grace and mercy. Now maybe you've been stuck in this sin or a temptation or an addiction and whatnot. What it doesn't say is, come on, let's do this. Let's knock this out together and it's over. The idea is just keep doing it. You're struggling? Are you weak? Run to me. Let your dad help you. I care about it and I understand what you're going through. And do it with confidence. He says, don't walk up to the throne of, don't walk into your time of prayer. Oh, God, I just don't know if you can love me, if the things that I've done is really just, it's so bad. I don't know. He says, do this. God, hey man, I am struggling right now. I need your help. Give me help. I need your grace. I need your mercy. Please help me. And the promise is he's not going to run you off. He'll give you what you need, grace and mercy. Does God care? Absolutely. Let me put it like this in this illustration to wrap things up. Let's say you're a father and you've got a son, 13 years old. The son just started high school. The son is experiencing a lot of new things in high school, trying to find themselves. And, and you just let your son be. Well, 2 weeks, 3 weeks in the high school, your son starts to change. Starts to wear different clothes, starts to talk with a little bit more of a dirty mouth. And you see these changes. And you say to yourself, what's going on? What influence is on his life? Well, one day your son brings a friend over. And the friend clearly tells you the reason why your son is changing. So the friend leaves you sit your son down, you say, son, I love you. I gotta tell you this. As your father, I do not want you to hang out with that person anymore. Here's why. You're becoming something that you're not. That person may act like they love you, but you are changing to a person I know you don't want to be. And your son pushes back, says, no, forget you, Dad, and goes off to school. Well, the next couple weeks, your son continues hanging out with this guy. And because your son is new at high school, this guy maybe is an older grade, and he accepts your son for who he is. So your son thinks. Your son feels cared for, feels wanted, feels accepted. But then 2 weeks after this undercover relationship, he's at the table with his friend, eating lunch, and he catches himself talking dirty about a girl in his class. Something he's never done before. And at that moment, the words of his father ring true. Oh my gosh, I'm becoming something that I never wanted to be. And now he's torn. This person, I think, likes me, I think accepts me, makes me feel safe and comfortable in this weird environment. And my dad says no more. At that moment, he realizes what he's done. He realizes the path he's on. That boy's got 3 options. Forget Dad. Forget that I just felt this way. Let me just continue hanging out. This guy, he acts like he loves me, he accepts me. I'm going with it. Or he could go up to his dad and go, Dad, I don't know if I'm your child anymore. I just don't know if you're going to accept me. I'm going to tell you something. It's going to be horrible. And or he can go busting through those doors on his way home from school. Dad, I need help. Dad, what you said 2 weeks ago makes sense now. I really need help. I've been hanging out with this guy, and now I see what you're saying. To me, the third response is the response we want for him. We want him to run confidently to his dad, to trust that his dad is going to help him in the time of need. Flip it around. His dad has 2 responses. 1, I told you not to hang out with him. I told you should not. Look, see what you turned into? He said, hey, a little bit of mercy. Hanging out with him is going to have its own consequences. And you're already kind of feeling that. Look, just know this. You're making your own choices. I ain't going to punish you. I ain't gonna punish you for what you've done hanging out with him. You're already experiencing that in grace. And by the way, you will always have a family and a home to come to. I will never disown you. I will never not call you my son because you hang out with this kid. You will always have a home here. You will always bear my last name. Let me ask you, what's the son's response approaching that throne of grace? I want to be with my dad. I want to be where there's real life. That's what I want. Does God care? He says in your time of weakness, in your time of your temptation to sin, run to him and let him show you what mercy and grace is all about. No, I don't see anything about the after. I mean, if you fall, you fall. You don't. It's just about that moment. What do you do? Does God care? Absolutely. Even in our darkest moments, even when we want to turn our back on him, he's pursuing us. Does God care? Absolutely. Even in those moments where we think he would never be able to care. So let us, church, Christian, child of God, approach God in confidence, holding fast to our confession, approaching his throne of grace and mercy to receive the help we need in the time of our weakness. Run to your Savior King. Run to the one who is God and who put on flesh in order to be the sacrifice so that you can have a relationship with God and call him Dad. I want to remember that all day, all next week. I'm running to God. In those moments of weakness, I'm running to God. And I'm going to know he's not going to shun me, but he's going to accept me, bring me in, and show me a side of his nature that's going to give me the tools I need to continue in my boldness and my faith.